Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, like all Americans, I was horrified to hear about this weekend shootings of two state lawmakers in Minnesota and their spouses. Melissa Hortman, a member of the Minnesota House of Representatives, and her husband Mark were murdered on Saturday. And John Hoffman, a member of the state Senate, and his wife Yvette were seriously wounded. I'm profoundly grateful to law enforcement that the alleged shooter is now in custody, and I look forward to seeing him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. There's no place for this kind of violence in our country. None. My prayers this morning are with the Hortman's family and loved ones, and for the speedy recovery of John and Yvette Hoffman. Mr. President, for far too long, the mullahs in Iran have publicly aspired to wipe Israel off the face of the map. And for decades, they have fomented a campaign of terror throughout the Middle East, threatening Israel and innocents everywhere and destabilizing the entire region. It was Hamas who killed more than 1,000 Israelis on October 7, 2023. But it was Iran who made that attack possible through years of funding, training, and weaponry provided to this terrorist organization. Mr. President, in the early hours of Friday morning, Israel struck back, attacking a number of sites in Iran, including sites associated with Iran's nuclear program. I spoke with the Israeli ambassador on Friday and assured him of my prayers for Israel's safety during this time and my hope that their operations, and any to come, will succeed in eliminating the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran and ultimately help bring peace to a region that has for far too long been at war. While the U.S. military is not involved in offensive operations against Iran, U.S. forces on land, at sea, and in the air have helped defend Israel from indiscriminate missile attacks launched by Iran. President Trump and our country remain steadfast in our defense of Israel and committed to working toward peace in the Middle East, and first and foremost, for the safety of American personnel stationed in the region. And should Iran have any designs on Americans, I urge the mullahs to think long and hard about the consequences. Well, Mr. President, Democrats continue to melt down over the reconciliation bill that Republicans are getting ready to consider. And their statements continue to be heavy on the hysteria and short on the facts. And nowhere is this more true than on the subject of the bill's Medicaid provisions. To hear Democrats talk, you'd think Republicans were getting ready to rip Medicaid from the hands of needy children and pregnant women. And nothing, Mr. President, nothing could be further from the truth. And today I would like to take a few minutes to set the record straight and highlight the facts on Republicans' efforts to root out waste, fraud, and abuse from Medicaid and ensure that the focus of this program is on the people that it was designed to help. Mr. President, like other federal entitlement programs, Medicaid is not on the soundest footing. Between Obamacare's expansion of Medicaid to able-bodied adults at or above 138% of the federal poverty line and the Biden administration's rules and waivers, Democrats have been growing Medicaid beyond its original scope for quite a while now. And federal Medicaid spending has soared. Between 2019 and 2023, Medicaid spending grew at more than 50%. And that kind of unsustainable growth, Mr. President, has consequences. Not just for taxpayers who are on the hook for huge new amounts of money, but for the people most in need, who have to compete with a lot of new individuals for available resources. Mr. President, Republicans are committed to preserving and strengthening Medicaid for the people Medicaid was intended to serve, like vulnerable children, pregnant moms, and elderly Americans. And to that end, we're making some common sense reforms to Medicaid to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse, and protect the program for the people who need it the most. And that starts with removing people who should not be on the rolls. That means illegal immigrants and other non-citizens. able-bodied adults who can work but refuse to work, and individuals who don't qualify for the program. We're going to rein in federal spending to states that choose to direct scarce state dollars to illegal immigrants. We will be instituting basic, common-sense work requirements for able-bodied working-age adults who should not be relying on taxpayers for their health care unless they are doing their best to find and maintain a job or contribute to their communities. And we will be overturning Biden-era regulations that made it difficult to remove individuals who don't qualify for the program. Are Democrats seriously going to tell us they have a problem with that? Removing these individuals is just basic good governance. It's fulfilling our barest obligation to ensure that Medicaid is working well for its intended recipients. Mr. President, I would note that while Democrat senators may be melting down over these basic good governance requirements, some of their states are actually taking similar measures. No less a Democrat state than California is looking to freeze the enrollment of illegal immigrants in its Medicaid program and charge premiums for illegal immigrants already enrolled. Why? Because the state can no longer afford to cover these individuals and maintain its other obligations. And yet Democrat senators here in Washington are melting down because Republicans are daring to focus limited Medicaid dollars on American citizens and those most in need. Mr. President, in addition to ensuring that the individuals on Medicaid rolls are the ones who should be there, Republicans are making several other common sense reforms. Notably, Mr. President, we are taking aim at rampant abuse of the provider tax loophole. Use of this loophole, which sees states inflate Medicaid service prices in order to garner a larger reimbursement from the federal government, was already a problem even before the Biden administration. In fact, President Obama released multiple budgets featuring measures to rein in abuse of the provider tax. But thanks to waivers the Biden administration issued to California and other blue states last year, allowing them to further exploit this loophole, taxpayers are now on the hook for tens of billions of dollars in new spending. Neither the Medicaid program nor taxpayers can afford that burden. And so we're going to rein things in. Mr. President, our bill makes a handful of other modest reforms to restrain waste, fraud, and abuse, but those I just mentioned are the big ones. Common sense reforms to protect and strengthen Medicaid for those who need it the most. And I would love to know which of these reforms my colleagues object to. We've heard a lot of bluster from Democrats about how this bill will cost enrollment and cost lives, but we've heard very little from them on the actual measures included in the bill. And so, Mr. President, I'd like to ask them, do they believe the federal government should still be giving states an enhanced Medicaid match if they cover illegal immigrants? Do they think individuals who don't qualify for Medicaid should remain on the rolls? Are they against work requirements for able-bodied working-age adults? Do they think there should be any limits on states exploiting the provider tax loophole? Exactly which of our common sense reforms do Democrats disagree with? Mr. President, Democrats used to support rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid and getting Americans back to work. So what's changed? Mr. President, while I can't guarantee the source of Democrats' hysteria, I suspect one or more of the following things is going on here. One, Democrats are still smarting from their election loss last November and are desperate to regain ground with voters. And I suspect that Democrats think that if they can successfully, even if inaccurately, paint Republicans as targeting vulnerable Americans, they might be able to claw back some electoral support. Two, I think Democrats tend to reflexively oppose anything supported by President Trump, no matter how sensible that policy might be. And three, I think that with Democrats' increasing embrace of the far left, there are Democrats out there who really do believe that government programs can continually expand without consequences, and that there's no limit to the amount of taxpayer dollars available for them to play with. Still, Mr. President, it's incredible that we can't agree on these common sense reforms. But we're going to move full speed ahead, protecting and preserving Medicaid for the Americans this program was intended to serve. I want to thank Chairman Crapo and members of the Finance Committee for their work on the Medicaid provisions of our bill. And, Mr. President, I look forward to taking up these provisions in the very near future as part of our final legislation. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum. Hold on. I request the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum calls with respect to executive calendar numbers 98 and 99. Olivia Trusty.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Democratic leader.
Mr. President, first about safety in the Capitol and our meeting today that Senator Thune and I called. First, I'd like to say that the Capitol Police have always been the silent heroes behind the scenes keeping members safe. That's no secret. The country saw that for themselves on January 6th and in the footage after. And they're doing a good job. We had a very good meeting where members brought up their concerns, and strong efforts are going to be made to answer those concerns with an expanded activity by the Capitol Police. But after the awful situation this weekend, there's real concern not just here in the Capitol, but with folks across the country about the safety of elected officials. These violent acts are an attack not just on the individuals who are targeted, but on our democracy itself. Public servants should never have to fear for their lives simply for doing their job. Public servants, there should not be an attempt to intimidate public servants not to do their job or not to take their job. So we need immediate steps. We need to take immediate steps to ensure the safety of members. That includes sending additional funding and resources to the Capitol Police. And there was agreement today in the Senate among Democrats and Republicans that we ought to be spending some more dollars here to protect the Capitol, the senators, and their staffs. But it's amazing. Instead, the Trump administration is doing the exact opposite. USA Today reported that as lone actor attacks are on the rise, Donald Trump had cut the program called Aimed at spotting them. This program is aimed to spot lone actor violent domestic extremists. Exactly what happened in Minnesota. But the day before a violent political attack in Minnesota occurred, the last top officials at a program that aims to spot the so-called lone actor violent domestic extremists were reassigned to other roles. And that's USA's reporting. In the 4 months since Trump took office, his administration has shrunk the Department of Homeland Security's Center for Prevention, Programs, and Partnerships, it's known as CP3, from dozens of analysts and supervisors. Now it has fewer than 10 people, led by a 22-year-old recent graduate with no law enforcement experience. Here we have more violent attacks, and at the same time, the Trump administration is cutting the very unit in law enforcement that's supposed to go after these lone wolf violent attacks and prevent them. Right now, we need to give law enforcement more resources to prevent these horrific attacks, not less. A program in charge of doing these things shouldn't have fewer than 10 people and be led by a 22-year-old with no experience. And what I'm saying here, that this program has been cut dramatically, the aimed program, will reverberate among everybody who wants a safer America, and should reverberate among all elected officials, Democrat and Republican, about the need to keep these programs. So we need to give more resources to law enforcement. But let me be clear. This dangerous environment isn't spontaneous. It's being stoked, often deliberately, by the reckless rhetoric coming from some of the most powerful voices in the country. When political opponents are treated like enemies, danger follows. And that's what Donald Trump has done. He's weaponized the Justice Department and law enforcement into going after his political enemies instead of going after criminals. It's the responsibility of all leaders, especially the President of the United States, to not just unequivocally condemn hatred, but to stop violent and aggressive language against political opponents. Trump has to see that his words have real impact and consequences. And here's one way he could start right now. He could demand of Senator Lee that he take down his inflammatory, despicable posts about the deaths of the 2 people in Minnesota. They're gross, they're disgusting, they're the kind of thing that just riles people up. Let Trump call Lee up and say, take them down, take those posts down. That'll be a start. But in general, he has to stop treating his political opponents as enemies, because danger will always follow. Last night on reconciliation, last night on the Senate Finance Committee, the Republicans released their portion of Donald Trump's big, ugly bill, his big, ugly betrayal. And hard to believe, it's even worse than expected. After Senate Republicans spent weeks promising they were going to moderate the House bill, they did just the opposite. They turned an ugly House bill into an outright travesty. Senate Republicans should reject the proposals from the Finance Committee and start over. Because if they proceed, they will harm tens of millions of Americans, kill millions of good-paying jobs, raise prices across or up and down on the average American, and help China. Let's go over these lowlights, starting with health care. The House bill already had the biggest cuts to Medicaid in American history. They're regarded as devastating. But the Senate version is even worse than the House version. It's the House bill on steroids. The Medicaid cuts are deeper, reach further, and the red tape is even longer than what House Republicans came up with. Under the Senate bill, tens of millions of Americans will lose health insurance, including working moms and dads. More hospitals will close, especially rural hospitals. And I tell my colleagues, that's mainly in red states. And these rural hospitals are often the only way people get health care in the rural communities, and they're often the largest employer in the states as well. Under their bill, doctors will lose their jobs, nurses will lose their jobs, states will carry more and more of the burden with fewer and fewer resources, which mean cutbacks. Premiums will go up. What you pay, the average American pays for health care will inevitably go up, even if you don't have Medicare or Medicaid. Now, I know there are a number of Senate Republicans who were worried about the Medicaid cuts passed by the House. But because the Senate package is even worse, I urge these Republicans to forcefully reject this proposal quickly. We know that if only three or four Republicans went to Leader Thune and said, we can't vote for this bill with these Medicaid cuts, some of the cuts, at least, would be eliminated. If they go along with this package, anyone who goes along with this package will be responsible for stealing health care from millions of their own constituents. That's true of Democrats and Republicans. Now, what about clean energy jobs? Remember how the Senate Republicans spent weeks promising they'd ease clean energy cuts passed by the House? Well, the Senate Republican clean energy package is a total head fake. That's all it is. They're trying to act like they got better, but they didn't. No matter what the Senate Republicans try to say about improving the House bill, the underlying substance did not change. The Senate clean energy bill cuts are every bit as destructive as the House proposal. It phases out tax credits for wind and solar projects within 6 months. And these phase-outs are a death sentence for clean energy. Wind and solar represent more than 90% of the new electric power in the United States. It's the quickest, cheapest way to bring power. What do Republicans think will happen when they raise taxes on 90% of our new electricity? They're going to send electric bills soaring. They're going to kill good-paying clean energy jobs. Estimated 850,000 people in the clean energy industry will lose their jobs. And they're going to surrender U.S. energy independence to China, which will leap ahead of us in wind and solar and dominate the world markets. American consumers will be at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party leaders in terms of what they pay for electricity. And these cuts will choke America's energy output right as we need to expand our capacity. We all know AI is going to demand huge amounts of electricity, and yet we cut off the quickest, cheapest way to add energy. Many on the other side say all of the above. This is not all of the above. This is just taking the most polluting, most expensive, most time-consuming way of producing energy. That's what it allows. It takes away the rest. 80% of the clean energy investments, we know, have been in Republican districts, but Senate Republicans are going to ship those jobs overseas. Anyone who votes for this bill and has clean energy facilities in their states, they're going to close those factories, limit those factories, and send the jobs to China. Just the opposite of what Trump says he wants to do. The bad news keeps coming. The Senate proposal does nothing to moderate the House SNAP benefits. It's still the biggest cuts to SNAP in history, depriving millions of kids and parents of vital food assistance. Senate Republicans have even found a way to bow down to the radical gun lobby. Remember, the House bill already had an insane provision that deregulated common sense rules on silencers that go back almost a century. But Senate Republicans, refusing to be outdone by their extreme House colleagues, removed registration requirements not just for silencers, but for short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and other devices. This is unhinged. Shame on Senate Republicans for choosing the gun lobby over the lives of our kids. Their proposal will mean gun violence will rise, police officers will be put at risk, innocent people will die. Finally, why are Republicans doing all of this? What's their North Star? Tax cuts for billionaires paid for by working families. This is the big difference, folks, between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats believe in lowering taxes, but we need to prioritize Americans who aren't ultra-rich, working families, the middle class, parents raising their kids, and small business owners trying to grow. But Republicans, meanwhile, believe in giving most of the help to the people at the very top. They believe that helping billionaires and big corporations is somehow going to make everyone better off. It's never worked. Trickle-down's discredited. They cling to it because they're in the obeisance of a handful of very greedy billionaires who seem to run the Republican Party on economic issues. Under their proposal, the top 0.1% of our earners will get an average tax cut of $400,000, but families earning less than $75,000 will be worse off. They'll actually lose household wealth. Under $75,000, you lose wealth. Over in top 0.1%, you gain an average cut of $400,000. The American people like that. The more they know, the less they like. When you put it all together, the Senate's version of Donald Trump's the Senate Republican version of Donald Trump's big, ugly bill is even worse than the House. It makes even deeper cuts to health care. It destroys American clean energy. It raises costs on working and middle-class families and rewards the billionaires at the very top of the economic ladder. I have a few more things to say. Abortion. Next week marks a very grim anniversary in America, 3 years since the disastrous Dobbs decision. 3 years later, 21 states have restricted the right to choose. 14 states have practically total abortion bans. And what is the Republicans' response? They want to keep going, attack reproductive care even more. Deep inside Republicans' big, ugly betrayal bill, they have snuck in a backdoor abortion ban. First, they have a provision that would defund Planned Parenthood. Second, they have a provision to eliminate coverage for comprehensive reproductive care from the marketplace. Senate Democrats will fight these devastating and deadly measures with everything we got, including through the bird bath. Both provisions have to go through the bird bath. Because here are the consequences of the Republican provisions. 200 Planned Parenthood health centers in 24 states would close. 90% of these closures would be in states where abortion is currently legal. So much for states' rights, not when it comes to abortion or guns with this Republican Party. And why are they doing this? Well, part of it's ideological, but part of it is to fund tax cuts for billionaires. It's an assault not just on Planned Parenthood, not just on reproductive care, but on every woman in America. Democrats will fight these backdoor abortion bans with every fiber of our being. And finally, on Senator Padilla's speech, and I see he's just come into the chamber, today at 12:30, our colleague Senator Padilla will speak on the Senate floor. For the first time, he was forcibly removed from a public briefing just for doing his job. I'll be here on the floor to listen to Senator Padilla speak. I encourage all of my colleagues, Democrat and Republican, to come and listen as well. What Senator Padilla experienced last week sickened all of us to our core, sickened every decent American to their core. No senator should be treated the way he was, manhandled, taken to the ground, handcuffed. It's not a moment for partisanship. Oh, no. It's about all senators supporting a colleague who is treated inexcusably for doing his job. I look forward to hearing Senator Padilla's speech later, and I encourage all of my colleagues to do the same. Yield the floor.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion, we the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Olivia Trusty of Maryland to be a member of the Federal Communications Commission for the remainder of the term expiring June 30th, 2025, signed by 17 senators.
Under the previous order, the mandatory quorum call under Rule 22 has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that the debate of the nomination of Olivia Trusty of Maryland to be a member of the Federal Communications Commission for the remainder of the term expiring June 30th, 2025 shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Sorry, thank you. Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Barrasso, Bozeman, Collins, Curtis, Grassley, Haggerty, Husted, McCormick, Paul, Rounds, and Scott of Florida. Senators voting in the negative: Mr. Thune, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Duckworth, King, Padilla, Schumer, and Wyden. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Marino, aye. Mr. Heinrich, no. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Crapo, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Ms. Smith, no. Ms. Ernst, aye. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Risch, aye. Ms. Hassan, no. Mr. Reed, no. Ms. Hirono, no. Mr. Schatz, no. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Coons, no. Ms. Blunt Rochester, no. Ms. Lummis? Aye. Mr. Whitehouse? No. Mr. Merkley, no. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Durbin, no. Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mr. Warner, aye. No. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Kane, no. Mr. Lujan? No. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Nope. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mrs. Murray, no. Mr. Banks, aye. Mr. Booker, no. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Bennett, no. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Ms. Alsobrooks, no. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Ricketts? Aye. Mr. Cruz? Aye. Mr. Johnson? Aye. Mr. Hoven? Aye. Mr. Mullen? Aye. Mr. Hawley? Aye. Mrs. Blackburn? Aye. Mr. Fetterman? Aye. Mrs. Hyde-Smith? Aye. Mr. Young? Aye. Mr. Lee? Aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Kim, no. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. Daines, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Hickenlooper, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 46, the nays are 39, and the motion is agreed to.
Mr. President.
The senator from California.
Mr. President, it's important for me, for this body, to know that over the last 2 weeks in Los Angeles, my hometown, that we've seen masked federal agents in tactical gear ordered into our communities. We've seen a disturbing pattern of increasingly extreme and cruel immigration enforcement operations targeting non-violent people at places of worship, at schools, in courthouses, all to meet an arbitrary quota. Now we're seeing President Trump federalize National Guard troops and deploy them without the governor's consent. Active duty Marines now being deployed, escalating tensions in our city. And it's important to note all this without coordination with state and local law enforcement. And despite repeated requests for the justification for these extreme actions, and after months and months of little to no response from the administration on their aggressive and theatrical immigration raids, the Trump administration has done everything in their power but to provide transparency to the American people about their mission in Los Angeles. And so last week, I chose to go home to try to get answers from the administration as they are literally militarizing our city. And I want to share what I learned, I want to share what I heard, because it should shock the conscience of our country. Now, one of the first items on my schedule last Thursday was a meeting and a briefing with General Guillot, the 4-star general in charge of U.S. Northern Command. Many of you know him. The briefing was scheduled at the federal building in West Los Angeles, where they're overseeing these military operations. Now, colleagues, when the United States military is deployed domestically, when our troops are deployed against the wishes of the governor for the first time since 1965, against the wishes of the local mayor, and even against the wishes of local law enforcement, both the police chief and the sheriff, we are in uncharted territory. So in my effort to do my duty, to conduct congressional oversight, and to try to get answers from the Department of Defense that state and local officials were not receiving, I went to the federal building in West Los Angeles. I was met at the entrance, by a National Guardsman and an FBI agent who escorted me through security screening and up to a conference room for my scheduled briefing. While waiting for my scheduled briefing with General Guillot, I learned that Homeland Security Secretary Noem was holding a press conference literally just down the hall. And that press conference was causing my briefing to be delayed. The thought occurred to me that, well, maybe I could attend this press conference and listen in. Just listen, in the hopes of hearing Secretary Noem provide some new information that could help us make sense of what was happening. I didn't just get up and go. I asked and was escorted by the National Guardsman and the FBI agent into the press conference. They opened the door for me. They accompanied me into the press briefing room. And they stood next to me as I stood there for a while, listening. And at one point, the United States Secretary of Homeland Security said that the purpose of federal law enforcement and the purpose of the United States military was to, quote, liberate Los Angeles from our governor and our mayor. To somehow liberate us from the very people that we democratically elected to lead our city and our state. Colleagues, let that fundamentally un-American mission statement sink in. That is not a mission focused on public safety. And that simply is not and cannot be the mission of federal law enforcement and the United States military. To my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, are we truly prepared to live in a country where the president can deploy the armed forces to decide which duly elected governors and mayors should be allowed to lead their constituents? Is that really the precedent that we're okay with setting? As Secretary Noem herself said last year when she was governor of North Dakota, at the time she said, quote, if Joe Biden federalizes the National Guard, that would be a direct attack on states' rights. That was Governor Noem, now Secretary Noem. Now, throughout this country's history, we've had conflict, we've had tumult, but we've never had a tyrant as a commander-in-chief. And that is not by coincidence. It's because the American people have always been willing to speak up and exercise their First Amendment right to protest, especially when our fundamental rights have been threatened. And as the proud son of immigrants from Mexico, it's that same right that I came to revere when marching through the streets with my family and my friends in 1994 in Los Angeles, protesting against the vile anti-immigrant rhetoric that was growing in California at that time. It was that year that a Republican governor was up for re-election and was down in the polls. And he turned to scapegoating immigrants to try to improve his political standing and his re-election chances. That fight is what inspired me to leave an engineering career behind and dedicate myself to trying to influence our government and our politics. So I've seen this before. California has seen this before. So last week, when I heard something so blatantly un-American from the Secretary of Homeland Security, a cabinet official, of course I was compelled, both as a senator and as an American, to speak up. But before I could even get out my question, I was physically and aggressively forced out of the room, even as I repeatedly announced I was a United States senator and I had a question for the secretary. And even as the National Guardsman and the FBI agent who served as my escorts and brought me into that press briefing room stood by, silently, knowing full well who I was. You've seen the video. I was pushed and pulled, struggled to maintain my balance. I was forced to the ground, first on my knees, and then flat on my chest. And as I was handcuffed and marched down a hallway, repeatedly asking, "Why am I being detained?" Not once did they tell me why. I pray you never have a moment like this. But I will tell you, in that moment, a lot of questions came to my mind. First of all, where are they taking me? Because I know I'm not just being escorted out of the building. Am I being arrested here? And what will a city already on edge from being militarized think when they see their United States senator being handcuffed just for trying to ask a question? And what will my wife think? What will our boys think? And I also remember asking myself, if this aggressive escalation is the result of someone speaking up against the abuses and overreach of the Trump administration, was it really worth it? But colleagues, how many Americans in our nation's history have marched, have protested, have shed blood, even lost their lives to protect our rights? How many Americans have served in wars overseas to protect our freedoms here at home? And how many Americans in the year 2025 see a vindictive president on a tour of retribution, unrestrained by the majority of this separate and co-equal branch of government, and wonder if it's worth it to stand up or to speak out? If a United States senator becomes too afraid to speak up, how can we expect any other American to do the same? And colleagues, you know me. I can't think of a person who would describe me as a flamethrower. I try to be respectful. I try to be considerate to every member of this body, regardless of our political differences. And so I do want to take a moment to thank all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who have reached out to share your messages of support, whether they were public messages or many in private. Trust me, they mean the world to me, and I know they mean the world to my family. But if you watched what unfolded last week and thought what happened is just about one politician and one press conference, you're missing the point. If that is what the administration is willing to do to a United States senator for having the authority to simply ask a question, imagine what they'll do to any American who dares to speak up. If what you saw happen can happen when the cameras are on, imagine not only what can happen, but what is happening in so many places where there are no cameras. Colleagues, this isn't about me. In fact, it's not just about immigrant communities or even just the state of California. It's about every single American who values their constitutional rights. It's about anyone who's ever exercised their First Amendment rights, or anyone who's ever disagreed with a president, or anyone who simply values our democracy and wants to keep it. Now, the president will tell you that this is just about undocumented immigrants, about law and order, and about targeting dangerous, violent criminals. If it was just about targeting dangerous, violent criminals, there would be no disagreement, there would be no debate. But we know differently. We don't think, we know differently. Public data released by the administration shows that the majority of immigrants currently in ICE custody have no prior criminal conviction. And new reporting shows that less than 10% of immigrants taken into ICE custody since October have no serious criminal convictions. Less than 10%. But a couple of weeks ago, it seemed that Donald Trump was at the lowest point of his presidency so far. He was drowning in a week of terrible headlines. The American people were finally waking up to the realities of the budget reconciliation bill that will cut health care, nutrition assistance, and good-paying, clean energy jobs while reducing the tax burden on billionaires. He was losing his tariff wars as the costs for everyday goods were continuing to rise. His promises to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine were falling flat, and he'd been handed loss after loss in federal court. He even had a very public breakup with Elon Musk. And I mention this only because we know what happens when the headlines turn on Donald Trump. When Donald Trump is having a bad week, he turns to the same tired playbook he always has. When in doubt, scapegoat immigrants and manufacture a crisis to distract the media from what's going on. That's the reason ICE raids ramped up in California. And when Californians took to the streets to peacefully protest, he bypassed the governor and federalized the National Guard. And even with their presence over a couple of days as things began to settle, he escalated even further by sending in the Marines. He wants the spectacle, not just to distract, but to justify his undemocratic crackdowns and his authoritarian power grabs. That's the reason why, even though the vast majority of protests have remained peaceful, what a weekend. That notwithstanding, the president, the vice president, and their allies have continued to call all the protesters out there insurrectionists. Yes, this is the same man who provoked an actual insurrection at our Capitol on January 6th. The same man who incited a violent mob carrying Confederate flags against Congress. The same man who then pardoned the convicted felons who assaulted our brave Capitol police officers. Donald Trump is continuing to test the boundaries of his power, and he's surrounded himself with yes men and underqualified attack dogs, from the DHS secretary to the FBI director to the Secretary of Defense, who will rubber stamp every anti-democratic step he takes. This administration's officials, and maybe not all, but many Republicans in Congress, may choose not to do their job, but they cannot stop me from doing mine. And I refuse to let immigrants be political pawns on his path towards fascism. Again, if you really think this is just about immigrants and immigration, it's time to wake up. What's happening is not just a threat to California, it's a threat to everyone in every state. If Donald Trump can bypass the governor and activate the National Guard to put down protests on immigrant rights, he can do it to suppress your rights too. If he can deploy the Marines to Los Angeles without justification, he can deploy them to your state too. And if he can ignore due process, strip away First Amendment rights, and disappear people to foreign prisons without their day in court, he can do it to you too. Because California is just a test case for the rest of the country. Last week, for many, was a warning shot, but I pray that it also serves as a wake-up call. We've now seen, since Thursday, we've now seen Trump threaten to do the same in other cities run by elected Democrats. He's saying the quiet part out loud. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. We all have a responsibility to speak up and to push back before it's too late. So I do encourage people to keep peacefully protesting. There's nothing more patriotic than to peacefully protest for your rights. Because no one's going to liberate Los Angeles but Angelenos. No one will redeem America but Americans. No one is coming to save us but us. And we know that the cameras are not on in every corner of the country. But if this administration is this afraid of just one senator with a question, colleagues, imagine what the voices of tens of millions of Americans peacefully protesting can do. I thank you all for being here to hear me, and I thank you, Mr. President.